Can you believe it? It's already day 5. And look at everything that you've learned. It's amazing. You've learned how to start, you've learned how to cut down, and you've learned how to stop. That's a lot. Now, implementing that sometimes takes a while, so be patient with yourself. And today, we're going to mostly review, and then we're going to go into some tips. We'll do that today and tomorrow for when the going gets tough, right? And if the going's tough now, these tips might come in really handy. All right, so the first thing is just remembering, why are we doing this, right? We're doing this because we want to live the life that we were born to live. Otherwise, why bother? You know, this is a lot of work. Now, a few deep breaths can really improve memory. So if you've had a busy day and you're just kind of running and rushing around, just pause and take a few deep breaths, right? Take that moment to relax before you go on. All right, here we go. So the review of starting, cutting down, and stopping. Remembering, of course, that to become who you want to be, to live the life that you want to be, it means stop doing what's holding you back and start doing what'll move you forward. Really simple stuff, right? And the Just Start formula. One thing, first thing, floor and ceiling, celebrate, right? Now the one thing was the thing that you chose, that keystone habit. And the first thing means before phone, before email, family, or any other inputs, right? You might have to be really creative here, maybe even get up a few minutes early. And remember, your morning begins the night before. So getting to bed early so that you can do this, right? We talked about that keystone action. We talked about the floor being the least that counts and the ceiling, right, being more. Keep that floor really, really short and simple. And then your ceiling, of course, is your ideal, and you can always do more than your ideal. But having this is what I'd like to be doing on a daily basis that you're shooting for. And of course, Dr. Fogg's work, celebrate. Remembering to celebrate those micro wins. Cutting down, not so different, the cut down formula, right? One thing, but instead of first thing, it's last thing. And then floor and ceiling, a little bit flipped here. Floor is what you'd have as your ideal. Ceiling is the most that you'd allow. And celebrate. And we're using one powerful tool here. That tool is delaying. By delaying, you gain freedom, right? And we put our priorities first, or we have a set window of time, or we have a curfew that we don't do it after. We talked about our floor being our ideal and that ceiling being the most that we can do. And then stopping a behavior, right? This says I was going to quit all my bad habits, but then I realized I don't want to be a quitter. All right, but I do want freedom. So I often talk to people about becoming free from tobacco, becoming free from alcohol, becoming free from some of those things that have them, whatever that addiction or compulsion is that they have. Think of it as freedom. It's kind of a neat reframe from quitting, right? So Just Stop, the Just Stop formula. One thing, rewired thing, floor and ceiling, and celebrate. Now remember, we've miswired our pain and our pleasure, right? I'll share a few stories about that, and we need to rewire it correctly. So the things that are best for us, the things that are moving our lives in the direction that we want to have it move in, are the things we find the most pleasurable. And the things that are hurting us start to become those things that we find the most painful. Duh, right? But it takes work. So rewiring enchantment, because we've been put under a spell. And then getting into this idea of I'm disenchanted with that. You might want to rewire or rewrite your story. You rewire your access, that hidden hurt and hard. And then floor and ceiling here. We focus on the moment where yellow light is those activities that bring us close to wanting to do that again, right? Maybe it's the pattern that we drive home, or maybe it's Friday night, or maybe it's after a meal, or whatever it is. Find something different to do in those yellow light moments, or reach out and call a friend, something to distract you. And particularly true for those red light moments where we're like really close, right? Reach out to a friend. Find something different to do, delay. All of those tactics are super important. Now what I've done here is synthesized ancient wisdom with modern science, right? And all of these folks are super wonderful researchers who've put together some great ideas. And I've tried to synthesize them in the most simple way that I can, but still being very effective. Of course, that one thing, remember, if you just wrote that down, you're 42% more likely if you review that regularly. And remember, changing one thing changes everything. Now, of course, the map's not the journey, right? So when you start to do these things, you're going to run into like, I didn't see that river down there. How am I going to get across this thing, right? Because simple isn't always easy. Even though these principles are simple, we're still going to struggle with them because knowledge is not enough. It must be lived. It must become part of our daily life, part of our practice. I love this quote by Deming, where he says, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Now, that includes us, and that includes our results that we're getting in our life. It's a little bit humbling, right? So anticipate the resistance, anticipate these challenging times, and go upstream to break through. Now, what I'm going to be doing is sharing the first few tips today and the next tips tomorrow. And these are tips to help you live it when the going gets tough. And the first tip is high-risk times. Right? Remember that red light and the yellow light? Those are high-risk times, but they also happen for some things that we're doing that are good for us, right? And two of the highest are stress and transition. And since this is a course on transition, of course, we're going to be talking about that. Now, here's some common transitions that you might run into, right? It might be something that's happening to you. Sometimes they're good things, like a new child or a new job or retirement, or sometimes they're not so pleasant, like ending a relationship, or for some people, their kids moving out is really challenging. Sometimes it's injuries or illness, yours or a loved one. Sometimes it's depression or mood challenges, again, yours or a loved one. But even vacations or company visiting or upcoming deadlines can throw us off our routine, right? So if you want to have success in all seasons, you need to think about these ahead of time. And this is a great time to really, if you need to, even drop your floor. Maybe you've raised your floor, but you might want to just go, okay, I'm just going to go back to my floor, but don't stop. Keep it trickling forward. Keep it moving forward on a little, even if it's the most minor thing you can imagine. Build it into your mornings, even on vacations, even when company's visiting, even when you have other deadlines, right? Or those transition times. So now, number 2. Multiple identities and voices. Now, we've talked about this a little bit already, this idea of who's driving. And in our next section, we'll be focusing on identity a lot. But I want to bring this idea up here so that when we go into identity, you actually realize how important it can be. Who is driving? If it's your old self driving, it might drive you where you don't want to go. So make sure that you're the one that's driving, right? If you want to live the life that you're born to live, think about the identity whose life that is. So this is a different concept. It's identity out versus behavior in. Now you can do either, both work, but sometimes it's really important to think about identity in and align those actions with your identity, and everything starts to get easier. And this is also this idea of to-do lists and shifting that to to-be lists. Making space for that. Or this, since I am an, you fill in the blank, then I blank. Like if I'm an athlete, then I work out. If I'm an artist, then I do my art. If I'm an author, then I write. You know, all of these things. If I'm a dancer, then I dance, right? If I'm a yoga person, then I do yoga. If I'm a loving partner, then I'm loving. And now empowerment stories. We talked about rewriting our story, and this is one of the ways you can rewrite your story. One of it might be this idea of maturation, like I've outgrown this old behavior. Kind of cool, right? Another might be responsibility, like I have this new thing that's really important to me, so I'm not going to be doing this anymore. You see this a lot with athletes. You see this a lot with people when they get new jobs. You see this a lot with people when they have kids, right? But you can also be responsible to your new identity. And then, of course, loving and serving that which is most precious. Right? So when you have something that's super precious, if an old behavior doesn't fit and a new behavior does, adopting a new behavior, cutting down, or stopping really makes more sense. So what's your reason? Right? What is it? What's your new story? I like this concept a lot. Number 4, actions equal votes. When you start to think about your actions as being a vote for or against who you want to be, it kind of increases the ante. It ups it a little bit, doesn't it? Right? So actions are actually votes for or against who you want to be. And that, of course, when you add that up over years and months, for or against your destiny. Because you can think about these lines. If you're doing something that pulls you away, that's going to pull you down. And if you're doing something that pulls you towards, look at the gap after 5 years. It's huge. This is an incredibly powerful idea of actions equaling votes. And we talked a little bit about this, primary versus secondary. Some behaviors, when we're looking at like, gosh, I really want to do this, it's actually because we're not doing that very well. Other times, there's something else that's driving it. And I'll give you a couple of good examples here. I was working with a client who wanted to sleep better. And it turned out they actually slept really well, but they weren't getting to bed on time. Why? Because they didn't have good boundaries with work. So their sleep was actually work boundaries. Kind of interesting. I was talking to somebody else, one of my other clients, and they were on social media all the time. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. You don't seem like somebody that would be on social media a lot. And they're like, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me either. And we explored it a little bit, and they were like, oh, this is where I go when I'm feeling overwhelmed. And this person was getting overwhelmed because they weren't setting good boundaries with their friends. And, their friends were, in some ways, using them to process all their stuff. And so they needed to learn to set some boundaries. It wasn't actually social media. It was boundaries. So maybe your behavior isn't primary, it's secondary, right? It's a secondary response to something that you need to shift. New options for old emotions. Now, we all have tons of emotions that come up, and we have coping mechanisms that served us in the past. Right? Now, it may serve your old identity, but it may not serve your new identity. Now, this one is really interesting. A lot of people, when they're feeling lonely or sad, they get inactive. But if you actually look at what would help sadness and loneliness, it's activity. All right? If you've ever studied even a little bit of Chinese medicine or a little bit of Ayurveda, you'll know that these are those types of emotions that need motion, right? So, and some people turn to eating when they're feeling lonely, right? They want to fill up that void with food. And then, if they do that consistently over time, they end up not liking their body and they feel even more lonely. So, again, looking at new ways to cope with old emotions that fit your new identity. Number 7, understanding the body. Now, when we do these changes, we're going to be feeling some things, right? And we talked about this idea of being temporarily uncomfortable, kind of like being soreness from the gym. Now, you're going to have that when you confront some of these things on an emotional level. You're going to be temporarily uncomfortable. It may bring up anxiety or depression or sadness or, as we've mentioned several times, maybe a bit of mourning, right, of letting go of this. Now, that is just like the soreness from the gym. Right? And if we think about this as obstacles are making us stronger, and you don't get thrown off by the mourning, you don't get thrown off by the anxiety, you don't let it pull you down that road that it normally pulls you down, guess what? Micro win, you just got stronger. And the environment, right? Changing our environment so that it actually serves us. Buckminster Fuller said it this way: if you change the environment, you change the people. And he used to look at all these different ways to change the environment. And I look at this and I say, wow, like if you take that Deming quote and you take this one, our environment is to produce unhealthy people. Right? If you look at what's happening in America, if you look at obesity rates climbing, if you look at stress and depression climbing, if you look at almost any measure, even life expectancy, the kids born now are not supposed to live as long as their parents' generation. Wow, right? It's because of our environment. We have a stressful environment. We have food that's readily available that's not healthy for us. It's difficult to exercise. All of these things, that's environmental. So how do you change your environment? Now, when you get a new identity, one of the cool things that I like to talk about is rearranging the furniture or putting up a new picture or somehow making it an obvious change in your environment. But some of the real practical things, is making things hidden and hard, which we talked about previously. Taking those things away. If you don't want to eat sweets, where your diet starts is in the grocery store, not at home, right? So that one. And then if you're starting something, making it obvious and easy. One that I really like, if someone wants to have movement, put your shoes right by your bed. So right when you get up, you look and there's your shoes. Oh yeah, I'm going to go do movement. Or put your yoga mat out in the evening. Whatever it is that you want to be doing early in the morning, have it really obvious and really easy to do. These all involve changes in our daily routine. And after a while, again, you will not feel like skipping this because it'll be like skipping brushing your teeth. You just don't feel like it. You don't feel good the rest of the day, right? And remember the morning routine, especially your mornings. When we get into habit stacking at the end, we'll be talking about this a ton. I've mentioned this and I'll mention it again. Repetition is the mother of memory. Your miracle morning begins the night before, right? So that binge watching may not hurt you that much that night. Where it hurts you is the next day. All right, and finally, resources. Now, this class is a resource. This group is a resource. Your friends are a resource. Other reference material are resources. And what we're doing here is we're doing deliberate practice. We're practicing communication skills. You're practicing trying on habits, trying cutting down habits. You're experimenting with stopping habits. All of these are what's called deliberate practice. And deliberate practice from the field of peak performance is the most important thing to mastery. Kind of cool, right? And of course, there'll be more tomorrow. This was a little bit of a longer one. So thanks for your patience. I thought you would appreciate a little bit of review and some tips. And we'll have more tips tomorrow. Enjoy these. Figure out which one of these or many of these is most appropriate for you. And then incorporate it. Have fun. See you tomorrow.